I want to make sure that we have time. Our left track for so well, what 2023 we're going to do things today. First of all, celebrate research at Elliott School, and we are also going to celebrate this year's winner of the Michael Brown Prize. We scholarship this year. Every year, the Michael Brown Prize is awarded to a faculty member who has made outstanding contributions to the scholarly and policy understanding of an important international issue. So we are delighted to have 2023 award Professor Robert Sutter as our keynote this year. And we will momentarily hear his remarks and program Congress and by mission to countering this challenge. Getting a little feedback. Okay. Is it good now? All right. Sorry about that. There's always something. Let me just before I provide our bio, I want to highlight some of the wonderful accomplishments and research experience in the last year. You all great deal. Major grant highlights include Seeger Center for Asian Studies, Institute for Korean Studies, together with the highly regarded designation of National Resource Center for Asian Studies. In line with the fact that we also this past year, and our National Resource Center designation for the Middle East Studies, which means that currently we have two research institutes with this national designation. We also received U.S. Foreign Language Area Studies Awards, Middle East Studies, and East Asian Studies, and other things. Our Institute for European Studies research professor Lebanon and large grants, $1 million to continue the program on research and security in Eurasia. We've also had very impressive series of publications. Recent highlights include the past year, the effect of the law of hail, continent of rocks by Professor Emeritus Sector, winner of the 2022 Book Award. And two co-authored books by Associate Professor Lana and within the book, Politics of Columns and Varieties of Nationalism. Two co-authored books by Professor Lynch, Political Science and Police Theory of Research, Arab Uprisings, One State Reality, What is Palestine, Brown, members of our faculty, also numerous awards, including the Wilson Center Fellowships, the researchers of Judge Spear, Professor David Shamba, Professor Sanga. Of course, many of you are aware that faculty member, University Professor of Political Science and International Affairs, Finnemore received the Skype Prize for Science, widely regarded as the Nobel Prize in Science, proud nation. Professor practice more of the sun, solar stars, Japan, as well as the 2023 Kennedy Astronautics Awards. A lot happening at the Elliott School. I would now like to turn to introduce Professor Bob Sutter. He is Professor of Practice of International Affairs here at the Elliott School, where he has been since joining school in 2011. He is the author of 22, I'm going to repeat it, 22 books and over 300 articles on the subjects of China and East Asian studies, but he also has an extensive background in policy and analysis in government. Prior to his teaching and scholarship
gratitude when I look back to this occasion. And what I find is that I express gratitude about all sorts of things. And it's my 13th year at the Elliott School. I'm very grateful to be here. David Shambaugh was very important to me coming here in the first place, alerting me to the opportunities here. And David's been a big supporter throughout my time here. And then Michael Brown used to be the dean here, and he hired me. So I'm very grateful to him. And Alyssa Ayers has been very helpful to me in the recent period. So I have so much to be thankful for in that regard. And then I have a lot to be thankful for in my career. I just have had a very interesting time here in Washington. And so it's just a personal reflection. But when I started, I worked in the U.S. government and the CIA at first. And I was focused on China, but I was a very cheap person. But I watched the opening take place. I mean, it was 1968. And so China was in the midst of the Cultural Revolution. So people were dying right in line. And yet it changed. The whole thing changed very dramatically over time. And I just had a ringside seat watching this. Of course, I didn't see the secret negotiation. I just saw China change. China opened to the West. That was an enormous thing, leading ultimately to Nixon's visit and the and engagement. And so engagement continued for 40 years. And then what happened? We changed again. For 6 years now, the United States has had a very firm policy toward China, very negative approach, looking at China as a real danger. And so what did I do? I said, well, I'm here in Washington. I think, and this is something that happened here. This is what's remarkable. It happened in this city. People in this city are always saying we're the most important in the world and we make policy here. And that happens once in a while. And it happened in the streets. And I watched it. I said, wow. It's a ringside seat to watch this change. And you know who did it? You know who was very influential? Congress. Congress was very influential in this situation. And that just doesn't get much appreciation. And you think about Congress, they're not looking so good in the House these days. You think about Congress, and this is it's something that happens here. But it's been very influential and so what I'm going to talk about today is the policy of Congress in dealing with China, and then Biden's policy. And it's going to be very positive about them, about Congress and doing it's effective. They have effective policies. But the story is negative. We're in for a long struggle with China. This is going to go on for a long time. But all I can say is that I think they're in a good position initially. And that's the basic message of my paper reading today, is to take a look at that. And my book is all about the role of Congress and how it and what role they've played in this situation, and looking back at the past. And what I found is that Congress is more important about China policy than at any time in American history right now. These 6 years is really remarkable. So do pay attention to it. You might want to even read the book, but the point is that it's nonetheless, it really is something that I think is important to understand. So let me get right to it, if you don't mind. My overall findings. I'll figure out what to do with this more time. There we go. There we go. The overall findings is that the process of hardening toward China took place beginning with the Trump administration strategy of December 2017. The implementation, however, the Trump government was very erratic. And what you found that in this situation, it was the Congress that kept at it. They adopted these strategies for their own, they thought about it, made up their mind that this was the way to go, and they pushed these are bipartisan majorities in the Congress, in the House and the Senate. And this is part of it, it's called the wisdom of the tongue strategy, and they continue to pursue it in their own way, leading to the hardened policies you have today. And so what we find is that it's the Congress working closely with the administration. Here they are, these bipartisan majorities working closely with a Trump administration and a Biden administration. And I can't think of two more different administrations in my whole life, these two. And yet they work well with both of them, dealing with China's challenges to the United States. And so what's happened here is how does one understand the challenges China poses to the United States? What are these people worried about? What are they doing in this kind of a situation and why? Well, I tried to study this, I've simplified it, because these challenges are multifaceted. There are so many challenges, but they come across in lots of different ways. And so I've grouped them in strategic ones and economic ones and governance issues. And when you look at Congress, they have a hard time doing this from a strategic point of view because committees have all these different assignments. And so they can't really focus on a broader picture. So I'm trying to create a broader picture, which I see as evident in China. So what are the challenges? The first challenge, and you see the map here, is for over 3 decades, China has been building up its military power and expanding its power and control in the Asia Pacific region, seeking to displace the United States. And that's been going on pretty steadily for some time. And they're close to the point of doing it. They're a powerful country. And so this is a big challenge. How these military dimensions feed into American policy for China is one big cluster of issues. The second big cluster of issues are economic issues. And we're all familiar, there are a lot of those, but basically I'm going to have to read because I've synthesized it. These are similarly long-standing efforts using state-directed development policies to plunder foreign intellectual property rights and using massive intervention by a wide-ranging and well-financed apparatus, Chinese party-state structure, to undermine international competitors, having increasingly profound negative impacts on U.S. and Western interests. But Beijing does so with hidden and overt state-directed economic coercion, egregious government subsidies, import protection, and export promotion, using highly protected and state-supported products to weaken and often destroy foreign competition in the industries they select. In this way, it recently seeks dominance in major world high technology industries and related military power to displace the United States and secure China's primacy in Asia and world leadership. So these are two big clusters. The third one is a big cluster too, it's governance. More than any other major power, Beijing leverages economic dependence, influence operations, including pervasive corruption and elite capture, and control of important infrastructure to compel references to its preferences. In the Indo-Pacific region, these practices are backed by intimidating Chinese military power. China's preferences include legitimating the above predatory Chinese economic practices and territorial expansionism, opposition to efforts promoting accountable governance, human rights, and democracy, opposition to U.S. alliances seen impeding China's rise, and support for the forceful foreign advances of Vladimir Putin's Russia and the rule of other authoritarian and often corrupt world leaders unaccountable to their citizens. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is harsh, but it's real. And two of these are really existential. And the first one is dominance in Asia. Strategists in the United States have often felt that if a power hostile to the United States would dominate Asia, that would pose a direct threat to the United States. And World War II showed them that. Imperial Japan did that. And so as a result of that, the US has worked hard for 80 years to preserve a favorable balance of power in Asia. Not to dominate Asia, but to keep the balance of power stable in the interest of the United States. And now China is at the stage where it could dominate Asia. And if it dominates Asia, this would be seen as a direct threat to the United States, not unlike the threat the US faced from Japan in the early 1940s or with Nazi Germany in Europe. It's the same type of logic. You don't want Nazi Germany controlling Western Europe, and you don't want Japan controlling East Asia. And the same now holds true. So that's seen strategically as a big danger, existential threat. The second major threat is the Chinese effort to seek dominance in the high technology industries of the future. Such dominance will make America subservient to Chinese economic power. America is the leader there now. They'll use that, and it will be subservient to China in that area. And because such technology is essential to modern military, its national security, the United States will be subservient to Chinese military. Seeking to avoid Chinese dominance remains a strong overall driver of the efforts of bipartisan majorities in Congress and administration partners to defend America against Chinese challenges. It also appears to be a strong driver in the foreign policy of Japan, India, and Australia. And increasingly, European powers, NATO, and the governments in South Korea, the Philippines, and the South Pacific Islands. All this underlines their efforts to work with the United States to counter China's advances. So this is the threat. This is the danger. And there's an agreement in the United States government on this kind of thing. Now, what about Congress? Over the course of 6 years, despite acute partisan differences, which you all know about on most issues, bipartisan majorities in Congress have worked closely together and with very different administrations to counter challenges posed by China's behavior. As noted, they have been more consistent and resolute than erratic President Trump. And President Biden, when he was a candidate for president in 2019, was very dismissive of China as a threat. He would say, when asked, he wasn't asked very often, but when he was asked, China, a friend. We're much more important than China. I'm not worried about China at all. That's what he would say. He said that repeatedly during the campaign. And so he was much more, so the Congress was much steadier in this regard. The Congress and the administration working cooperatively together have resulted in recent years in increasingly effective efforts building positions of strength at home and abroad in carrying out acute competition with China and countering its ambitions. So this is the positive dimension that I'm talking about. They're doing a good job in creating these positions of strength. Members of the bipartisan congressional majorities hardening China policy came to their positions, and this is important, generally without major influences of partisan politics or public and media opinion or special interests or a strong drive to compete with the president for control of U.S. foreign policy. All of those dimensions were key matters in Congress's involvement in earlier episodes dealing with China policy. One or the other. They're not very relevant. They're secondary in the current situation. And so against this background, the congressional members have deliberated and individually made up their minds about the challenges posed by China's behavior. So they've looked at it. Historically, when members do this, and I've had 24 years of experience with Congress and how they work in this regard, when they do this, they make up their minds. And when they make up their minds, you know, they don't change it. They don't have a lot of time to think about it. Okay, I spent 2 weeks understanding this China stuff. Okay, I made up my mind. You know what I'm going to do. Now, I really saw this in the past, but I did see it about Taiwan at the time of the normalization relation with the United States. Those members that resisted this had made up their mind. They also wanted more power from the administration, but they still had that dimension. But basically, this is different. And what does this mean, folks? Think about it. Most congressional seats are safe. And so these folks are going to get reelected. And if they don't change their minds, what does that mean? They're going to be tough in China for a long time. They're going to, in my judgment, they're going to provide a lot of continuity in U.S.-China policy going forward. It'll take a lot for them to change their mind. And as we'll see, Xi Jinping is not really thoroughly doing too much to help them in this regard. Okay, so then I have in my speech, I have a series of steps that have taken place and might illustrate what I'm trying to talk about today. So let me just go through that. It goes in chronological order, and I think you might find it useful. In 2017, the Trump administration came up with their strategy. Very critical of China. Read that. It's, given my experience in the Cold War, this is a Cold War time. It really read just like something. I said, where did this come from? I said, this was the Lyndon Johnson administration rhetoric. And so it was very tough. And China was number one. China has never been number one as a strategy. So that's very different. And but Trump didn't pay much attention to his strategy, hardly ever talked about it. And the public didn't know anything about this, and the media didn't talk about this at all. They were talking about Trump's antics, he was doing one thing and another. And so the result is you had some bargaining and you had a trade war, but that was one element of this. But basically you didn't have this comprehensive approach, but Congress came in with it. And in the National Defense Authorization Act, it's a very must-pass bill. Congress doesn't pass very many foreign policy bills because they don't agree. They can't get them out of the committees very easily. So this is they use this bill, the defense bill, which is a must-pass bill, to enlarge on these elements of foreign policy dealing with China. So this bill in particular was very important. August of 2018, it passed the National Defense Authorization Act of 2019, most important foreign policy and legislation of that year. And it had a whole series of things about changing China policy, but an overall mandate. We need a whole of government effort to counter the challenges of China. So that's been the focus of the congressional activities since that time. But in 2019, we had begun trade negotiations with China. So the Trump administration wanted them to go well, so they didn't say too much about China in 2019. They sort of calmed down. And Trump was very positive with China, always talking about his friend Xi Jinping, this type of thing. And so, and then you find that also, this was the beginning of the primaries for the campaign for 2020, and the Democratic primaries featured a lot of discussion, but hardly anything about China. Very little. And I mentioned Mr. Biden. Maybe you heard of Jake Sullivan. Have you heard of him? Yeah, you know about Jake Sullivan? He's an important guy. He's the national security advisor for Biden. And this is what he said in 2019, July, when he was asked about this. He says, well, the American people don't really care about China much. They want to continue to trade with China. And so we don't think the candidates, the Democratic candidates, should say very much about it either. So that's very interesting that they had that mindset at that time. Congress didn't. Congress kept hammering away. But of course, it was not getting much attention. So public opinion didn't know anything about this, media didn't care very much, and so forth. So I really thought this would just die out. This phase would die out. Well, it didn't die out. COVID came, hit Trump hard in March of 2020. His campaign plan totally failed. He had to have a new one, and the new one focused on China. So he became consistent, finally, consistent about China. He was very critical of China beginning in March 2020. And so this was a feature. And then his administration followed through with lots of actions against China. And by this point, there was a lot of acrimony between the Chinese resisting and this sort of thing. And so by mid-2020, we find that public opinion turns against China. That China was responsible for COVID and all this sort of stuff. And the Congress was very much in line with Trump and his administration. And so they So they kept going, and they had a whole series of measures were being passed by the administration, and very tough posture toward China. Joe Biden had to change his position, and he did, and he got elected. But his view of China still had ambivalence to it. In 60 Minutes, in October 2020, he was asked about this, and Russia's the main thing. Russia's the main thing, not China. And so that's Joe. And I don't know what the upshot of that is, except that he was president and he came into office. And I was looking for, okay, well, then we're going to see sort of he was vice president for Obama, maybe an Obama-like policy will be used for China, moderation toward China, this type of thing. He changed. He, Sullivan, Lincoln, all these people from the Obama government changed. This is something I don't know. Sorry, I wish I did. Why did he change it? But he changed his mind, and by March of 2021, he was saying this about the infrastructure bill. Remember the infrastructure bill that was passed? That's very important. Over $1 trillion worth of stuff. And he said, we've got to do this because this is the beginning of the fourth industrial revolution, and China is going to lead the fourth industrial revolution if we don't do something about it. And he said, we can't let them win. And that's the attitude that you find in Congress. The widespread, it's too dangerous now. We can't let them win. And so this, of course, meshed very nicely with Mr. Schumer. He had a big bill at this point that eventually will pass in 2022 about computer chip advances and so forth. And he was very articulate in the same way as Biden was at this time. And so okay, so that's where we were in 2021, and that continued. And we had another bill critical of what was going on in Xinjiang, the forced labor there. Again, both bipartisan bills, both supported, both very anti-China. Then you move to 2022, and what do we have? The Russian invasion of Ukraine. Wow, what an enormous development. And predictions were widespread that this is going to divert American attention away from countering China. And you know something? It didn't happen. What happened was a strengthening of this. Not only did the US continue the effort, but countries like Japan saw this situation as very vulnerable to them. The implications of what the Russians did for them was very profound as far as China was concerned. European powers turned very much against China because it was the main international enabler of Putin's actions. And so they were very hostile, very critical of China, and ultimately hostile. And looked at the situation in Asia as very important for them. Taiwan, South China Sea, these kinds of issues. They're willing to stand up to the Chinese against these kinds of issues. That's what happened as a result of the so-called diversion of attention because of the Ukraine issue. And then we had the episode of Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. Anybody remember that? We had a bit of a crisis there, didn't we? 4 days of Chinese military exercises and so forth around Taiwan. Well, so you'd expect that big debate. People like mainstream commentators are talking about you're afraid we're going to have a war, this kind of thing. And what happens? What happens to U.S. policy? It gets harder. Congress reinforces its position. Biden reinforces his position. He says once again, we'll support Taiwan militarily if it's attacked by China. And we passed these bills, that Computer Chip Science Act, which I talked about, which lots of tens of billions of dollars for U.S. competition with China. And then the so-called Anti-Inflation Act, which is sort of like a climate change act, which is also heavily targeted against China. These are collectively $1.5 trillion of money that's going to be spent in ways that will counter China in one way or another. And then the administration, with strong congressional backing, cuts the technology contact with China that would allow China to produce advanced computer chips. And then it starts cutting US investment and regulating that. So all of these things transpired after the Pelosi visit, showing that the resolve of the United States is very strong. Congress supports this fully. And so looking out, what I see is a situation where we're going to have difficulty. So the United States has now done these things domestically, strengthen the United States. And then we look at positions of strength in the region. And the Biden administration has done a pretty good job of this over the past year or two. They're competing with China for influence around the rim of China where it matters. Now, Russia is not an area that matters then. Central Asia is not that. Pakistan is in close to China. That's not going to change. So the area of significance goes from Japan all the way down to India, the Indo-Pacific region. And in that area, the United States have been building positions of strength that the Chinese don't like at all. They're very critical of them, and they fear them now. They seem to be the media is very concerned about these. First one is AUKUS, the Australia-UK American relationship. This is not just about submarines or missiles. This is about high technology and broad cooperation between these three countries. And then we have the G7 and NATO taking strong positions dealing with China and Asia, bringing in countries like Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and India in their deliberations as they discuss how to deal with the China danger, whether it's the economic danger, the military danger, or governance. And they deal with all of these things. It's not just one, it's not like a military, it's different, much more collaborative and much more multifaceted. And then you have this relationship that's been built up with Japan. Look at the change in Japan's defense strategy. Amazing. I thought I'd never seen anything like this. Getting, what, 500 Tomahawk missiles? Japan having 500 Tomahawk? I can't believe that. This is amazing change that's going on in Japan. And then we have the capstone. Isn't it wonderful? I mean, Joe Biden can schmooze with people really well. I think he's an expert schmoozer. And so he brings, who does he bring here? He brings Japanese leader and South Korean leaders to Camp David. So symbolically, this is tremendous. Camp David, wow. You know, Jimmy Carter, we all remember that. And subject to other, it's like when Eisenhower and Khrushchev met on the farm in Gettysburg. It's this kind of stuff. And the upshot here is that they have this understanding. And so if you do the score sheet like I do, you look at the rim and you say, how does America do it vis-a-vis China? And I say, okay, look north, Northeast Asia. America has a very strong position of strength. These three powers, US, Japan, South Korea. This is something President Yoon of South Korea has put aside his differences with Japan historically, and he's moving ahead with them. And we're cooperating not just in military, we're cooperating chips and high technology and governance issues as well. And then you look down in Southeast Asia. I don't know how this happened, but the Philippine government has changed its position enormously. And so you find that in the Philippines, they're now willing to host American bases, right, in an area that will be used if there's a Taiwan contingency. So this is a pretty big affront to China. And the earlier one is a big affront too, because you have the South Korean president, President Yoon, saying, China, you're wrong. The Taiwan issue isn't just an issue between you and Taiwan. It's an international issue, great implications. And then if you go down with the Quad, India, Australia, and Japan, all being energized to facilitate greater interaction with all their neighbors, so they build resilience in the region. And so you have a Euro-Asian front being created in Asia all around the rim of China, the important. And so from Beijing's point of view, you look at what they're doing, and they have this playbook, which is economic blandishments and punishments. And that's what they've used over the years, been very successful, and now it's not working. They've tried it with Australia, New Zealand, didn't work. And so what do they do? Well, I don't know what they do. I think they don't know what to do. And I think what you find is that the Philippines have done things that are very offensive to China for about a year, and they haven't done much of them. And the same thing with South Korea. They haven't done much of them. So looking out, as I said, the US has an advantage. It has momentum. And this effort is going to continue, it seems to me. So let's look out for a minute and then take it on. And what we find is that the Chinese are not changing their positions, their challenges. They continue to do what they've been doing. And so that's going to take a long time to change. And so what we're in for, I think, is that we've set up our positions of strength, and hopefully there'll be more. And we'll be there competing with the Chinese for some time to come. So this isn't nice. We end on a negative sort of situation. My students hate this. They want to fix it all the time. Let's fix it. I'm an old intelligence officer, and intelligence officers love the problem. They love to tell you all about the problem. And then you ask them for the solution. That's not why I don't do this. And so the point is that I do have that tendency, but I think this is real. This is a real problem. And but I'm not overly pessimistic about this at all, because I think the United States and the Chinese leadership don't want war. I think they'll work something out that will keep the situation from exploding. And of course, in both of their interests to do this. But we will have intense struggle. We did this with the Soviet Union. It worked up to a point. And comparatively speaking, the Soviet Union during the Cold War era, when the intelligence officer would go to the office, they would think about, okay, what are we dealing with here? Well, the Soviet Union had 30,000 nuclear warheads aimed at US targets. And the US had 30,000 nuclear warheads aimed at Soviet targets. So the bottom line is you don't want to make a mistake. You want to be very careful. And I think we're at that stage with China. I think we'll be careful. We can do it. It's not pretty. It's not going to be pretty. But I think you can see the reality. I'm giving you the picture, looking out. The main thing that ever changed on the US side was not Congress. Congress is going to be there doing this very strongly for the next, for many years to come. So what could change? Donald Trump. Donald Trump will come back, America first, we really undercut this alliance and allies and partners that is so important in the fight against China. That could have a big impact. But you know why I don't worry about it too much? If that happens, I think you'll see them resist. I think you'll see them stand up and say, this is not the way we're going to do it. And don't you try. Because I think what I've seen is they've made up their mind. That's the point I'm getting at. It's not because of political loyalty. It's not because of partisan politics. It's not because of special interest. It's because they looked at the issue and said, God bless us, we've got to do this. We have to defend America. Okay, I'll stop here.
Questions? So, do we have, now you've got a mic? All right, so we've got a question over here.
I'm Peter Murphy, an intelligence analyst and a former diplomat. Somewhere around 1950, we realized that the Soviet Communist Party was incompatible with civilization in the long term and started acting against it on all fronts. But amazingly, the one that won was the information knowledge. the 40-year-long information operation that let Soviets know what the rest of the world was like and what Russia could be. So I want to know, when does the campaign begin to break the Communist Party of China? Where's the secret committee on the NSC to start engineering against authoritarian regimes in general, and China in particular? Because as best I can tell, there's nothing right now.
Yeah, well, I don't see it myself, you're right. I think my explanation might be, it is at this point, that the Americans are still busy trying to defend America. You're looking out, how do you deal with this change in situation? I think it's more from the American side. I think it's more, what do we do about these damn spy balloons? What do we do about TikTok? What do we do about these kinds of challenges that are coming down the pipe? And so, and ultimately, what do we do about the big issues of China dominance in Asia and China dominating high technology in the future? So I think they're preoccupied with defensive things at this point. That's the best I can do. Question over here.
Which one? The gentleman or the gentleman or the?
No, I just saw the lady. I didn't see.
Oh.
Yeah. Gentlemen too, but they have. Oh, there.
Hi, Alex Lowe, Senior Associate Asia Group. I'm also an MIPP student. I'm curious as to your thoughts, given recent news around the October 7th rule and the updates to that, and China's reaction to that US policy and export rules. Also, there are new export controls happening. What are your thoughts on the potential Biden-Xi meeting happening on the sidelines of APEC coming up, and if there's any potential wrenches that might be thrown into those plans, even though it's not a confirmed meeting yet?
Right. Well, the Chinese don't want to meet. They use it for leverage to get the Americans to make compromises of one thing and another. And Biden hasn't been very good at that. He hasn't made compromises that I can see. And so if they don't meet, I don't think it's not. What's the disaster? I mean, I don't see a disaster. So, but I think the media will make a big deal out of it and say this is wow, it's really terrible. And I just don't think it's that important. So I think that Xi Jinping will reiterate his positions, Biden will reiterate his positions, and hopefully, and we are doing exchanges. We're now congressional exchanges and having delegations and going back and forth. And so I think this is so that's part of what Biden wants, is people want. They feel that these exchanges and dialogues between these two sides will act as a brake on a war. Where they won't vote because of those kinds of things. So putting all this emphasis on Xi's visit, he'll come when he comes. I mean, I think it's just a point here, if I may. They did meet in the G20 in Indonesia in November, and China made a compromise. And they hardly ever make compromises, and they never say they do. But up to that point, for about a year and a half, the Chinese said Biden wanted these dialogues, one of the guardrails against war with China, having a discussion. And the Chinese wouldn't do it unless the Americans changed their policy. And people like the foreign minister would give our Secretary of State long lists of things he could do to improve his behavior, to do the behavior of the United States. And they did that repeatedly. And then, but when Xi met Biden, he went ahead with it, said that we should go ahead with this, and he said nothing about it. So that's interesting. We have to ask yourself, why did they compromise? They didn't talk about it. They didn't say they compromised, but they did. And so I think that they have to work with the United States. I think he'll show up. I think he'll show up. But the point is, if he doesn't, I don't think it's such a big deal. We Because we're in a phase where each side is gonna lay out their positions, and and there'll be some overlap, there'll be some cooperation, I think, in certain areas, right, it's gonna happen. But I don't see any breakthrough, because I think that the push in the United States is to defend America, and there's more to be done. And we keep finding more things to be done. And this year, we found balloons, TikTok, intrusion into the Microsoft files, which got to the cabinet members' emails, and this enormous information expose by Meta. All these four things happened just this year. So we keep getting more manifestations of the China challenges, if you see what I mean. So I think Congress is very prone to saying, well, what are we going to do about those? And I think we have there's momentum on that, and I don't think that will go away at all. The gentleman in the blue shirt.
Dr. Sutter, thanks, Scott. I love to pick your brain. I mean, you're very intelligent. You've got a lot of experience in this field, and I've been studying myself for a long time. My question is, so when we restrict technology to China, or we prevent them from using microchips, or or we prevent them from working with the NASA, the space agency, they just become resilient. They create their own chips. They have a good space program, so that they counter everything that we do. We all trade with them, so they go towards Russia, send cars over there, they find alternatives to everything that we're trying to accomplish. So I guess my question is, what is the solution to this? I know you said intelligent people don't really come up with solutions. I'm a policy guy, so I like to find a solution, but how do we counter this rise sufficiently? I mean, not just saying one thing or another. And now that they're turned to the global south, and they're peace brokers in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So my question is, what is the solution to this growing, emerging threat to the United States?
You defend America, sir, and I think that you're really downplaying the cost that China encountered in doing these kinds of things to work around the U.S. restriction. I think they cost them a lot. And therefore, I think that matters. China is very dependent on U.S. high technology. And they always say we're self-reliant, and that's baloney. And I think that this is something that so therefore what we're doing in the chips area, I think really matters a lot. And these other areas that we're working with, they don't have a good answer for it yet. And what are they going to do about the Philippines? What are they going to do about South Korea? This kind of stuff. And I think that in Europe, they've lost Europe. I mean, it's amazing how NATO is so strong in opposition to China's expansion. And so let's look at the Taiwan situation from that's the do I have a minute to do this? I don't want to take away from the question. When I was the national television officer, we did 2 estimates about Taiwan. Would they attack Taiwan? That was 20 years ago. And when you do that, you start out and say, well, okay, there's going to be a war, they're going to attack, the Americans are coming in, who will be with us? No. Japan, no. Nobody. They all have one China policy. Today, if I was briefing Xi Jinping on this issue, I'd say, so she would ask, who's America going to be on with America on this one? Japan. Militarily. Australia. Militarily. And then you, Great Britain, probably. Canada, probably. And then you have NATO and others, the European powers. What are they going to do? They're going to put in sanctions on China, just like they put on Russia after its invasion of Ukraine. They now have a model how to do this. How will it be as extensive? I'm not sure. Will it cost China a lot? Yes, sir. So, boss, do you really want to do this now? Maybe we should wait. Let's see how the elections go. Do you see what I mean? I think this is a pretty good deterrence situation. It's better than it was, that's for sure. So that's a game. I'm trying to make my point clear.
Yeah, we have allies, they don't, obviously.
Exactly, and they matter. And we've got a president that's really good at this. This guy, I empathize with him. I'm Catholic, you know, he goes to church. When he's on these trips, he has mass in his hotel room. Anyway, this guy is really the guy. So anyway, but the point is that he's good at this sort of thing. When I ask myself, why is Yun making these decisions in South Korea? Why is Marcos making these decisions in Manila? These are dangerous for China. Because I think he knows he's got America at his back. And the guy that persuades you on that is Biden.
Thank you.
David? Yeah.
Thank you, Bob, for a splendid talk, and I can tell everybody because I've already read the manuscript, the book that's forthcoming on the topic is fabulous. Recommend it to everyone. Christmas is coming. You can get your loved one a good, nice gift. But in all seriousness, I'm totally persuaded by your argument, Bob, about the bipartisanship and the unanimity on Capitol Hill. And even across the country, vis-a-vis China. But the puzzle for me, which I really don't myself understand, and I'd like to ask you for your insights, it has to do with the business community. So we have $69 billion of trade between the United States and China. The business community, despite problems that they've encountered, well, they've always encountered problems in China. The last few years, they're encountering a few more problems, but they're still all in. The U.S.-China Business Council, AmCham, corporate America is not on board with this congressional policy. In fact, corporate America are the outliers. So given Congress's dependency on campaign contributions, the lobbying that the business community has traditionally undertaken on Capitol Hill, my puzzle is, why does Congress have isn't listening to the business community? The business community doesn't seem to be an actor here. And I'm just kind of puzzled by that. Do you have any thoughts on it?
I have thoughts about it, you know. And it's basically national security trumps economics in situation one. Dominance? You want to be dominated by China? Think about it. And so the point is, no, nobody wants that. Nobody in Congress. And so the upshot is, and we have to do what we have to do. And so what you find is an ever-growing restrictions on the business community, and that's going to continue. And these little fights will take place, and then they'll move to the next stage. And because national security is going to override the other matters. Now, it's probably not going to be dramatic, and they're going to do it carefully. But the point is that the threat is still there. I think they're trying to defend America, and you can't do that by Caterpillar making a lot of money in China. That doesn't defend America. They have to make an argument. And so, and the fact is that they're an outlier, and they're outside, and they're not putting ads in the newspaper or advertising. It shows that they feel vulnerable. They can't publicize this. They can't, because they know that the public in this atmosphere will look at them very negatively. So I think that's the momentum. That's the part of the momentum, it seems to me, and I think that's likely to continue. John here.
Hi, my name is Yuto. I am an undergraduate student studying the Middle East. And recently, Russian President Putin praised China's Belt and Road Initiative. And so, for my interest and also study, I wonder what are your thoughts on the current counter strategy, probably started in India and planning on counter with the China's Belt and Road Initiative. What are your overall thoughts on it?
Countering the Belt and Road Initiative.
Right.
Yeah. That's very hard. I think it's it's a very attractive thing to many countries in the world. linking themselves to China's economy and the rapid growth and wealth of China. All of that is very attractive. I think it's going to be very hard to compete with that. I think the United States, there's lots of downside to it. So Belt and Road doesn't work in Europe anymore. It used to be pretty popular in Europe, not anymore. And overridden by national security concerns, among other things. And of course, the practices that the Chinese bring to Belt and Road are sometimes quite negative. They try to leverage, they try to influence these countries, they try to undermine certain basics, and they try to support certain factions versus others. And so this is not welcome in one places. But authoritarian governments tend to like it. They're like-minded. Corrupt governments, Chinese foster corruption, they're very active. Most of these deals, many of these deals have a lot of corruption because they're non-transparent. It's easy to be corrupt. So how do we compete with that? I don't think we can't do that. It's against the law. So you get into lots of trouble. So so that's a reality that one just has to deal with. Now, what I find is, of course, the Belt and Road Initiative isn't what it used to be. The money isn't there, and they have a lot of problems with home economics. So I think that's going to peter out a bit. China took advantage of a lot of countries that were solvent for a while, and then they made them unsolvent by doing Belt and Road Initiative, and now it's hard to find countries that are solvent. COVID has been a big problem, and so these economies just don't have the wherewithal. So I'm not too worried about it because I think the trend is diminishing. But still, it's important, and I don't think the U.S. can compete with that. Lady here, please.
Thank you for your timeline. I have a couple of questions about it. Dr. Sandra, Elliott Alum, and Junior Fellow at ORF. I should probably wait for your book, but really quickly, President Biden has been a member of Congress for a long time and was during the 2018 period when Congress began to take like a harder stance on China. So I guess my question is, what do you think made him immune to that environment where members of Congress were making up their minds and taking a harder stance? My second question is, we know the outcomes of Speaker Pelosi's visit, but I've always wondered what the rationale was. So if you have any insights on that, that would be great.
Yeah. On Biden's policy toward China, the congressional resolve was really not very apparent in 2000. In other words, people like me saw it because I'm nerdy. I look at the data, I look at what they do. But most people didn't pay much attention. So the media didn't pay attention to it. So none of the candidates got tough questions about China. They're all sort of dismissed it. Amy Carpenter, she said, yeah, when I'm president, I'm going to do 100 things and not only one related to China. It was the 84th. And well, that was emblematic with the votes around China at that time. So, I think that's, and why Biden changed in 2021, I don't know. But I think these congressional friends of his had something to do with it. And then the second one was about
Speaker
Pelosi visit, was right. Well, I mean, she was trying to support Taiwan, and the Chinese were trying to tell her what to do. And why should she do that? They're not the boss. You see, and so you worry about China. But she said, no, I'm not worried about China. I'm going to go over and do my visit. And you can say, oh, that's really stupid and so forth. And it was useful. It showed the strength of the resistance to the policy. 3 weeks, strident commenters on freedom, going ballistic on the decision. And so many others. What happened? Nothing. The impact was totally negative. Nothing. See, so I think the resiliency of this policy is very strong. You can see what I mean. And they doubled down on the policy of the administration of the Congress. And so I think that that's where we are in this situation. Defending America is what's important. How are we defending America? How do we best do that? Eric?
Herbert Van Louisen, staying at the George Mason University. You really gave a fantastic overview here of the history, and it reminds me of the time we met in 1980 already. So the US has come a long way, and you and I have come a long way.
You're in the book.
My question is also on the way that Congress decides and makes up its mind. I think part of it is also that China is shooting itself in the foot with Xinjiang, with Hong Kong, with its threats against Taiwan, and that rubs Congress the wrong way sowieso. But also a lot of organizations are very supportive of Taiwan, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and very active here in Washington. And they really help put the picture clearly on the radar screen of Congress. So can you say a little bit more about that interaction between those organizations and Congress?
Well, I think the Congress is a very porous place. And so if you're trying to influence, you usually can get into the door and talk to people. It's not that hard. The members usually want to know the different views that are being bandied about an issue that's controversial. They want to know, because they're not sure where their constituents are, because it's a new issue that emerges. And so lobbyists are very, very important in this regard. And the I call them lobbyists, the advocates of these various organizations are lobbying for human rights and this type of thing. They're seen as very important. And so if you want to know the perspective of Human Rights Watch, well, the boss say, okay, this is what's happening. What does Human Rights Watch say? What does Amnesty say about it? They'll do that type of thing. So I think, so they have answered it, and they have influence. Yeah, they do have influence, and I think so. You're right. It does alienate. Nobody likes what's going on in Xinjiang. That's for sure. And so, but that's a reality.
So I think we're gonna congratulate Professor Sutter. For his book, which comes out in November, remember, and please join us so you can have a reception out here, correct, Christine? That's correct. Okay, please do.